Hello, and thank you for joining us for tonight's webinar on communication and assessment. This is the third in a series of 6 webinars being produced by the High School POGIL Initiative and the POGIL Project. My name is Cindy Wingenroth, and I'm the coordinator of the high school programs for the POGIL Project. I will be serving in the role of host for the evening, getting us started with some basic information about POGIL and wrapping things up at the close of our program. Our presenter for the evening will be Carrie Jacobus, and I'm going to ask Carrie to introduce herself to you now.
Hi, my name is Carrie Jacobus. I'm from Riverdale High School in Oradell, New Jersey. I teach AP Chem, Organic Chemistry, and Honors Chemistry. This is a picture of me in my Mole Day costume. I don't know if all of you celebrate Mole Day, but that is the molar system. And it's my favorite day in chemistry, though every day is my favorite day in chemistry, and I am thrilled that you are here with us tonight. Back to you, Cindy.
Thanks, Carrie. Also helping us this evening by monitoring our chat and organizing questions to be addressed at the end of the presentation is Christine Sands. Christine is from New York, and she's a science teacher at Buffalo Seminary in Buffalo, New York. Christine served as a writing partner in the High School POGIL Initiative project, where she helped to author, review, and classroom test activities that are included in our collection. You can use the chat window to the right of the presentation screen to enter any questions or comments you might have, and Christine will, like I said, be collecting those for Carrie to answer throughout the evening. And I think I'll ask Christine to continue our chat that's already rolling by telling us what classes she is teaching this year, what science classes she has. So before I launch into an overview, oh, there she came in. I'm teaching regular and honors chemistry. Awesome. Before I launch into an overview and history of the POGIL Project and the High School POGIL Initiative, the HSPI, I do want to share kind of a caution or disclaimer about tonight's webinar and all the webinars in the series. And that is that these events were not designed to serve as a replacement for the hands-on training that is provided at a POGIL workshop. Instead, our webinars are casual and conversational in nature, giving classroom teachers who are currently implementing POGIL an opportunity to share their personal experiences and some anecdotes, which hopefully will help you see how POGIL theory translates into classroom practice and can give you some points to think about when you're considering how POGIL activities can fit into your classroom and curriculum. If something sparks your interest tonight, I really encourage you to attend an event if you are at all able. Information about upcoming events and workshops is available on our website, POGIL.org. I know that we have an introductory workshop coming up in April in the Cincinnati area, in early April. We have several workshops that will be taking place in conjunction with some larger conferences. If anyone is attending a 2YC3 or an ACS meeting or BCCE this summer, we'll have workshops at those events. And we also have multi-day regional meetings throughout the country in the summer. So again, check POGIL.org to register if you're interested. And with that said, here's my 2-minute overview of what is POGIL. POGIL stands for Process-Oriented Guided Inquiry Learning. It began in the mid-1990s when a group of undergraduate chemistry professors really became dissatisfied with the traditional format of lecture classes and wanted to look for alternatives. They felt that they could be doing more in their classes besides just delivering content. And so they started to investigate different kinds of learning, theories and pedagogies, and research on how people learn, and found that the ideas of constructivist learning theory and cooperative learning theories really resonated with them. In particular, 3 findings that they kept coming across over and over were that teaching by telling does not work for most students, that students who are part of an interactive community are more likely to be successful, and that knowledge is personal. Students enjoy themselves more and develop greater ownership over material when they're given an opportunity to construct their own understanding. So they began working together to design activities, specially designed activities for students to use in groups. The activities that they ended up creating all follow a learning cycle and focus on core concepts to encourage deep understanding of course curriculum, while working in groups to increase the students' process skills, their critical thinking, their ability to work together, those kinds of things. So the process-oriented, the PO, is the cooperative learning part, and the GI is the guided inquiry, the constructivist learning part. Each of the activities in our POGIL collections begin with data or information presented in some kind of model. And then that model is followed by a series of leading questions that are carefully scaffolded to guide students to a desired conclusion. So it starts with the model, questions to explore that model, and then students draw information and come to conclusions and develop a concept from what the questions lead them to. And the end of the activity is the application phase of the learning cycle, and it's questions that give students an opportunity to do something with that concept that they've just constructed. So they're applying the concept. They used these activities in their classes and met with great success and shared that success with the National Science Foundation, and in 2003 received a grant funding to begin to share this method of writing and teaching with others. So that was 2003. They started going to workshops and giving presentations at conferences and other large events to disseminate this pedagogy. And eventually high school teachers started coming to these events and were interested in having information for their grade levels as well. And that led us to creating the high school POGIL initiative. They sought funding to help develop materials for the high school and to help to train other high school teachers. And in 2008, this HSPI project was launched with three main goals. First, to develop collections of activities that are appropriate for the high school level. Second, to train high school teachers to use POGIL in their classroom, and also for high school teachers to be able to share information about POGIL with others. And then third, to work to develop a network of implementers. And it's those folks who've been part of this initiative, Christine and Carrie, who are helping us tonight, who are working to put on these webinars to continue to share POGIL with others. And that whole grant was funded by the Toyota USA Foundation. So out of that grant, that first goal we said was to create collections of activities, and two of those collections are available now. There's a POGIL activities for high school biology and POGIL activities for high school chemistry that are available through Flynn Scientific. We also have AP collections that are in the works. The AP Biology collection is also going to be available through Flynn Scientific, probably the end of April or beginning of May that can be ordered. And then the AP Chemistry collection that we're working on will come out in their January next year catalog, 2013. And all the activities in this collection, again, will follow that learning cycle that I mentioned of exploration, concept development, and then application. And the activities also include learning objectives, background knowledge prerequisites, extension questions, and assessment questions. So it's a really great collection to get you started. If you're interested, I encourage you to check out Flynn's website for information about that. And at this point, I'm going to turn things over to Carrie and ask her to go ahead and get us started with the goals for the evening. Carrie.
Hi, can you hear me? Hello? Hello?
You're good.
Oh, you're okay? You can hear me? Good. All right. We have four major goals for tonight. The first one is frequency of POGIL use within an average classroom. We're going to ask you in a couple of slides to give us what your experience is with POGIL and what you do or do not do in your classroom. Communicating with parents and administrators about what a POGIL classroom is and how it can affect the students' learning. You also have to prepare your students for POGIL and how to assess the POGIL activities. So that's our focus for tonight. We would like you to use the chat to please let us know what your POGIL experience is. A, no experience. B, don't use POGIL. C, once in a while. Once a week. D, or E, more than once a week. So we'd appreciate it if you could kind of let us know. Oh, wow. Only 2 people have answered. Okay. Okay, well, it looks like we have a variety. It's just about everybody done. It looks like some people have no experience in POGIL, some use more than once a week, and some don't use it at all. Okay, well, there's a variety here. That's great. So I'm going to close this out and we're going to go on. So it gives me an idea of what's happening. How often, if you do use any type of cooperative learning, doesn't have to be POGIL based, how often do you use it? Once a week, more than once a week, etc. If you could answer that, we'd really appreciate that. Okay, once in a while, more than once a week. Wow, wonderful. That's really good. I'm glad all of you are using some sort of cooperative learning. I think it's an important thing to do, though I feel it's much easier for a teacher to stand in front of a class and lecture. It's a little bit less work. Okay, thank you very much for answering that. I want to share with you a little bit of what I do in my classroom. And what I do in my classroom really comes from what I've learned from master teachers, and I'm always open to explore different learning styles. And what I found is that most teachers use a variety of teaching techniques. All students have different ways of learning. I tell my students at the beginning of the year they should figure out whether they're an oral learner, a kinesthetic, or one that has to write, or a verbal learner. I tell them that I am a kinesthetic and visual learner. And for me, if they tell me, oh, I'm going to come for extra help, period 5, it's going to go in one ear and out the other. I have to write it down. So I really want them to do it. And part of our job as a teacher is to do a little bit of differentiated learning. And so I feel that in my class, I use a variety of techniques. I try to divide my classroom into maybe 3 different blocks of time. This way the kids don't get antsy. We go from one activity to the other, just moving along within the same concept and reinforcing. And I seem to find that students learn a little bit more successfully that way. And we know each class has its own particular personality. Some years you have that class where you don't have students that are very cooperative, or you have students that just don't get it or don't want to spend the time. So using a variety of teaching techniques, hopefully you can at least address some of their issues. And effective teachers, it's important that we be open to helping students be successful learners, whether we're encouraging them to do it themselves or not. I find that I use cooperative learning or group learning 3 or more times per week for a variety of things, for homework check, problem solving, inquiry problems. And I use POGIL created activities when applicable to the content that I'm covering or the level of the student. And that's really important to me. Sometimes I have to adapt the POGIL because it might be too low for a class that has a lot of really high-end kids in it, or I have to make it a little bit easier for kids that I know have some reading issues. It might mean that I might have to take parts of it and make the font bigger, because believe it or not, making something a font 14 makes it easier for the students, and I think that's just a perception thing. And I find that when kids have problems, I encourage them to solve it within the group first, no matter what kind of activity we're doing. And they have a certain pride in it. Sometimes I have them do a problem based on their homework, and they work together on it. Okay, we'd like to know if you could please tell us in the tab on the right, how do you primarily communicate with parents? Do you have access to their email? Do you need to call? Do they call you? We'd like to take a little poll again, so to speak, but we'd like you to enter it into the chat. Whoa. I love that. You don't have to talk to parents because your students are adults. That's a really good one. Wow. Some of you really have to communicate with parents a lot. That's pretty amazing. In my school last year, we got a program called Genesis, and we opened it up a year ago so that students see every grade the child gets at all times. So some of you are communicating by email or phone calls. We have a large 15% of our students are Asian, and the parents, they don't have always, sorry, they don't always have a very good command of English. So phone calls are not always successful. So emailing them gives them time to respond where the kids can help them with the English. But I find that most of us are doing email and online grading, so that's good. For me, emailing a parent is the best way, because if I get mad at their response, I have time to calm myself down. And some of you at private schools have to send notes all the time. Amazing. Okay, well, I know the first place I'm going to start communicating with parents is on back to school night. But we have 10 minutes. I talked to Christine the other day, who's monitoring our chat, and she has 7 minutes. So you don't have time to communicate that much. But parents are coming in with their own preconceived ideas of what school is based on their own experience. They think that students sit in rows, maybe they do labs in a chemistry or science class, and they just sit and take notes and then look over the notes at night and take a test or a quiz, and they move on. So I list the different kinds of learning situations, not only on my website, but on the board when they walk in. I tell them things like lab experience, experiments, group work, projects, student-directed guided inquiry. And I stress that student-directed learning and taking ownership and responsibility for their own learning is a lifelong skill. Nobody hands you how to do your job step by step. Most times it's about solving problems. My own children said to me when they went off to work after college that they couldn't believe all they did all day was solve problems. And I said, that's pretty much what life is about. There's always something that comes up and you have to adapt and learn something new. And I always tell my students that I teach them life skills as much as I'm teaching them chemistry. I also encourage parents to email me with questions at any time. If you feel that POGIL is very different than the educational experiences your students have had to date or that you've had, then maybe you need a sense of comfort by sending a letter home to parents and encouraging them to visit www.pogil.org, the POGIL website. You can use what are called the talking points that I think Cindy said she might have available at the end of this presentation. If not, you can find them on the POGIL website to highlight the benefits of POGIL, such as research-supported student-centered strategy, students fully engaged in the learning process, and developing process skills such as critical thinking, problem solving, and both oral and written communication. Again, these are very important life skills. And to let them know that the activities focus on core concepts and encourage a deep understanding of the material. And I think that that's wonderful. Okay. How common within your school, not just your classroom, are you aware of inquiry-based activities in your school? Now, I think you have to click on the survey itself. You have to click on the screen, and then you'll be able, oh, wow, one so far, to participate in the poll. Wow. Okay, well, it appears that some of you have never seen it. Some of you have seen others using it. Yes. And I think it's something you're not used to seeing. A lot of teachers are not given time to learn a new way of teaching. Some feel uncomfortable with it. Thank you all for participating in that poll. It gives us an idea of where you sit or where education is sitting in the general public. I find that I just jump into something, and if it fails, it fails, and I tell the kids it's a learning experience, and that's what life is about. So I don't always go where it's safe. I like to tread into deeper waters with the sharks once in a while. So now I want to go on to not just communicating with the parents, but communicating with administrators. And before you might invite an administrator into your classroom, I would practice what it is to be a POGIL facilitator, and you can learn to be one through attending a workshop, which is where I first learned about POGIL about 6 years ago. And I came back, and from my first workshop, I just dove right in and put it in my classroom that week. I said, well, I might as well try it, and if it doesn't work, I can go back to using a piece of chalk. At that time, I had a chalkboard. But once you're secure with POGIL, you should invite an administrator in to observe and watch active learning. Administrators are often surprised by how fast students become involved in the activity, and this is actually based on a comment made to me by my principal. I was being observed. I decided I was in the second day of a rather large POGIL type activity. It was before POGIL made high school-based POGIL activities, and it was in a college prep class. I gave the students instructions. I told them who was having what role, and within seconds, the kids moved their desks, got involved in the activity, and the principal came up to me and said, I've never seen anything like this. Students to be just involved within seconds. And what made it really wonderful for me is she was observing the second day, and there was a group of 4 that had been a 3 the day before. And so this girl that was absent was totally lost. She didn't understand any of the material. There were no quote unquote notes. There was this activity. And the principal and I watched these 3 students teach her the material and walk her through the entire POGIL, asking her questions, making sure she understood, having her fill out her papers. And that was a moment I almost felt like crying, because you saw active learning and people taking ownership and then turning around and taking that information and teaching someone else. And it was certainly wonderful to watch. My principal always tells me, you should teach everybody this, but again, my school is not really very good about arranging professional time where peers can teach each other. I would encourage the administrator to walk around and listen and watch and interact with the students and ask them what they're learning and see if they can explain to the administrator what's happening. I think once you teach using POGIL, I think it's a really good thing to share test results. If you have 2 classes of the same level, it might be interesting to take one and teach in a regular traditional way and use one that has more activities associated with it and see if there's any difference in the way that the kids learn. And if you see nothing different within the grades, maybe by talking to the students, you might get the experience being a better experience. And always be prepared with information to address the questions, because they want to make sure you're doing something that is an effective way of teaching. Do you think students tend to be excited about inquiry-based activities when you might have seen them? And again, yes, no, not yet. And I can't read the rest of it. Just please click on the screen. I don't know if there's really 7 of you here, but thank you for answering the questions. What I think is nice if you attend a POGIL workshop is that they teach POGIL by doing POGIL. So they get you involved, not sitting there taking notes. You're actually going through an activity to learn about how to do POGIL. And I was always excited. I think many students get nervous because they want to do and give you the right answer. And sometimes there's a lot of discussion. And I talk a lot in my class about how sometimes there is just no right answer, you know, and maybe we just know so much right now, and when we get more technology, we'll learn it in a more deep manner and in a better way, and we'll be able to come up with an exact answer. So I find most of my students will participate. I do have a problem once in a while with my older students, my seniors. And this comes up to communication with students. How do you train the students? The second day of school, I put the students in random groups based on male, female, what age they are. My honors class is mixed sophomores and juniors. And Sometimes I get to look back at their science and math grades from last year, and I take someone with a high math grade and put them with someone with a low math grade, and then 2 medium math grades. I use it a little bit almost like Kagan. I don't know if you've ever worked with cooperative learning groups. Spencer Kagan is kind of the guru of cooperative learning, though many of his activities are more based for middle school or elementary school. I also kind of put my groups sometimes by Adlerian psychology, which talks about your birth order having an effect on your students. So in my first years, I might actually have them do an activity where they have to put themselves in first child, last child, middle child, and then once they go to this activity, I sit them down. They have to focus on something with observation skills. And then I make these groups, they do the activity, and I'm training them in their roles. I explain what is your job. Everybody has a job, and this is what your job is, and we're going to stick to the job, and you'll have a chance to work around it and over time have different jobs. And then I will gently go around and try and encourage them to down the right path. I will listen to them, talk to each other. I will ask them questions and see if they're beginning to understand. And then when we're done, I ask them to write about their own experience. And I love when they get very excited because they figured it out and they're not just sitting and listening, they're being active. At the beginning and some newer activities that I'm using, I ask the kids to report out using what's called an SII. I think Cindy might also have that available at the end. And it's an evaluation where you take a strength, an improvement, and an insight. So you talk about the strength of this activity that you had for yourself, what could be improved, and what did you learn? And it gives a student an idea of what goals they're supposed to get, and it lets you know what they've gotten out of it, because sometimes what you think this activity is going to teach isn't exactly what the students have gotten. There's a disconnect, or it's taught something else, and this way you can see which activities and what are good for the students for this level and how to adapt it. And I don't always start out with a POGIL activity. I'll do something like, I don't know if you know what a ghost crystal is. It's polyacrylamide. They use them for plants to, if you can't water your plants for a while, you go away. It absorbs 600 times its own weight in water. And it has the same refractive index. It bends light the same as water. So when you put it in water, it looks like a ghost. It has this kind of jelly-like consistency, and kids can't figure out what it is. And I set up a beaker with water. I tie a string around the ghost crystal, put it on a pencil, and put a copper wire right through the middle of the ghost crystal. And it looks like this wire, once the ghost crystal is in the water, it's actually floating inside this circle of string. And the kids have to make as many observations as possible. And that's many times how I start this. It gets them writing observations, it gets them playing their roles, and then the next day we'll talk about qualitative versus quantitative, and then I do an SII. I do not do an SII after every single POGIL. I do it when I feel that I need to check up on the students and how they're thinking about what went on during this activity. At the beginning, some students may have a hard time. They don't want to do it. They don't want to be active. They're afraid they're not getting the right answer. I have found through my own classroom, what other teachers have done, that I've heard through HSPI when we would get together the 3 summers to write the books, you have to be patient and supportive. Most of what we do in the world is about working together in groups. It's a skill that most businesses want colleges to train in their students, and colleges look back to high school and say you should start working on teams and groups. And so I think it's important that students understand they have to rely on others, and sometimes you have to be a little bit more encouraging. Like I said, I have some issues with seniors. Some of them have been with me for 3 years through honors chemistry, AP Chem, and now in organic, and they get a little bit like independent and they feel like they don't have to do this, but I just say, listen, this is what we're doing, this is what you have to do. Because there is a chemistry professor named Andre Stramas who has been writing POGIL activities for organic chemistry. And again, POGIL activities work best with an emphasis on the roles students are using. There's many different roles. I use cards that have 3 lines of description, short, brief descriptions of what each role is, so students don't have to read and get too confused. I try to make it big and bold, and they're bright colored paper. Yellow's one thing, purple's another, green's another, and yellow I think is another one. And I change the roles every time we do an activity. And you can change it to different roles, like I call them spokesperson and technician. I have a reader, I have a recorder, I have, I have something, oh, I have a manager who's watching everybody. But there are different kinds of roles, and sometimes your students might need to have a different role card name and a slightly different responsibility with their job. I also make sure to do follow-up activities using assessment questions that are within the POGIL or ones that I have written to check for understanding. One thing that POGIL people try to stress is that the activities that are for this group are really to be monitored by the facilitator, who's the teacher. You should not use this for a sub-activity or for individual worksheets. Activities are not homework. Once in a while, depending on how far we've gotten, I might assign extension questions, which come at the end of a POGIL activity as a homework assignment as check for understanding. But the next day when the students come together, I have them come into their groups and check their extension questions. And you hear really nice discussion back and forth. Well, I did it this way, and I did it that way, and how come our answers came out the same, and what's going on here? And it's kind of nice to hear them really talk back and forth to each other in mostly a respectful manner, and to just share that there's not always one way to do things. Now, how do you decide how to grade this kind of activity where there isn't necessarily a quiz? There's been a lot of learning going on. There's a lot of activity. A POGIL classroom is not a quiet place. People are talking. They're supposed to be, I always have a reader. I don't know if they're supposed to be. I always have someone that reads out loud, which in a low-level class can be a little bit of a problem because they sometimes have reading issues, which means you can change the font or cut down on the number of words that they're showing at a time. You don't have to give them a whole POGIL activity at once. So I look at what students are understanding. I want to know, is the instructional process working? I try to control the pace of group work, and I do it in a couple of ways. I tell them there's a stop sign. You have to call me over at the stop sign, and I'm going to check for understanding. I sometimes take a group that has a very, very strong student in it, wants to move quickly, and after every question, I tell them they must pass the paper to the right. And many students have a problem with that, especially in a higher end class. They don't like anybody to write on their work. I have a student that numbers every single page in her notebook, and when she hands in homework, it's got numbers, 146 to pages 149 on them. She color codes everything. It's amazing. She would never want anybody to write on her stuff, but I say sometimes you have to give up control of what you're doing and let someone else touch it, and I think that's a good thing to learn. So what I do is the kids answer a question, they pass the paper to the right. Sometimes I give them different colored writing implements so that they can see whose writing was whose, and eventually they get their own paper back. That controls the pace of the group work, so the student that understands it all without ever having to teach it, and there's always some of them in your class, can now become part of the process, which is really important. By having the stop signs in POGIL activities, you can go and you check for understanding, uncover any misconceptions by specific questions that you might ask, or looking at the work that they did. You also can assess whether anything needs to be adjusted within the lesson, that the kids are not getting it the way it was designed to get. Maybe there's some words that lead them off on the wrong path, so you can fix the lesson for the next time. Okay, I would like to know, how do you yourself grade group work, since most of you seem to have done group work? So if you can please enter your responses in the chat tab to the right, Christine will take care of you. I don't know if everybody's answered, but I'm certainly getting some very interesting answers. I see someone else has said that they use whiteboards. I have small whiteboards with dry erase markers in the class, and the kids love them. They love to be the first person that, first group that shows it and gets it done. I like the fact that some things get too mathy and they're asking for a POGIL. I actually have had that. I've had kids come up to me that really like the hierarchy of questions, and they say, "Do you have a POGIL for that?" And I'm always like, "I don't have a POGIL for all these things yet," and I couldn't wait for the book to come out. And you're right. I see Les says they hate to think at first, and I think that that's true. I think that students are so programmed to have information inputted to them that they somehow have to take in, analyze, and spit back, that they are not happy when they are asked to all of a sudden think. And I think it does take a little while. I really like the fact that those previous homeschooled love it. Thank you, Christine. I had a student 2 years ago that was homeschooled. I'm not too sure that POGIL would have happened, but he was the first person I ever threw out of lab. Okay, well, thank you for all those comments. But I think it's all with time. And you're right, they do hate to think at first. Thank you. I learned something. I wish I had clickers. I would love clickers. Can you tell us what your goals for using a cooperative activity would be? And again, please enter your answers on the chat to the right. Okay, whoops. Oh, Chrissy, I totally agree about preparing them for the workforce. I was at a seminar maybe 20 years ago, and I heard businesses talk about how they need colleges to prepare students for the future, that it's very important they learn to work together and communicate with people from all over the world, because the world's going to be a very different place in 20 years. And that has finally trickled down to high school, and I think it's really very important to learn to rely on others and to have a give and take. Oh, that's true. I love that. Everybody Les says to begin conversation and thinking on a topic without me having to recite definitions for 30 minutes. That was really good. I like that, using a group mind. That's a very good phrase, a group mind. I'm writing that one down. Cooperative skills, very important. I always tell my students a story about how there was a machine or some tool that was being made by the United States and England together, and it was going to be sent up on a space shuttle to the space station. And when they got up there, nothing fit together because England was using the metric system and the Americans were using the American system. Not a lot of cooperative communication going on there. I think that's wonderful. All the things that we want for our students to take out of our classroom, though I certainly would love them to remember chemistry too along with that. Okay, well, thank you for sharing. Now let's go take a look at our assessment techniques. Some of you have already talked about how you assess, but how do you grade group work? What are your goals for using a cooperative activity? Again, like you said, encouraging student process skill growth and encourage emerging group dynamic. POGIL activities are designed as learning tools and notes. And I tell the kids to save my notes when they go off to college. Many students, even college prep students, come back and tell me how their notes made them the chem god, and they are teaching other students. And I think that that's wonderful that they can help others 2 years after they actually had me, or 3 years. Many times I will collect the activity and I give participation points. To me, they're directed in class, they're working well. I can keep track of it on a clipboard. I actually have the group names on and I check off, I make little comments about what's going on. Sometimes I collect the activity and I grade the process skills rather than the content. I'm able to analyze what the questions are like. Sometimes we do a whole class overview and then one person will hand it in for the entire group. That makes me rely on the recorder who's recording and the manager who's making sure everybody is writing all this down. There's something called POGIL on Task, POT, which is a rubric which you can use. When you are a facilitator, it's important that you walk around and be part of their learning experience, not necessarily by integrating yourself into their work and group dynamic, but by observing and watching what's going on and coming in and facilitating and directing them when need be. Also, it's suggested by some teachers that they keep these rubrics as a way of comparing things from year to year, so you have a track record on what happens. I also give a quiz sometimes after a POGIL activity to see if they actually can take the POGIL in the group and then understand it. Sometimes after I give the quiz, I will have them, it's called a pair check. For the whole class, if I put it and I project it as a mini quiz instead of on a piece of paper, the question will be projected on the board, and then they quickly do it on a piece of paper, and then they switch it for a pair check and they grade each other. I might give them an open POGIL quiz using the completed POGIL activity. So they're actually having the POGIL activity in front of them and then answering the questions, going back over that. I always tell them what you never want is an open notebook or open book quiz or test, because then you're expected to know an awful lot because you have all your information in front of you. And I can attest, after being a graduate student, that it is always a more difficult test. I like to give out individual work. That's an extension of what the group activity was trying to teach, and I collect it and I check for understanding. Again, I give them participation points. I just count these all as little quizzes, or just I have a category called POGIL/quiz in my grading program, Genesis, and that's how I kind of analyze it. I want to give them credit for their activities and their group work, and then for me, quizzes, no matter what kind of quiz, is really used for understanding and concept check. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Cindy, and let's see if you have any questions. And I have enjoyed presenting with you tonight. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Carrie. That's been great listening to your tips and tricks and ideas, and also seeing the discussion that's happening in the chat. So I would invite anyone who has more questions to enter those in chat now. I don't know if Christine, if we had any questions organized. I don't see anything. I think Carrie's actually been able to address most everything throughout the presentation. But I'll give you a minute if you have a burning question for Carrie or myself before we wrap up. Okay, I see a question asking about different roles that are used. I don't remember the specific ones that Carrie said. We can ask her to turn her mic back on and share that. But on our POGIL website, on the slide that you see in front of you, there's a resources tab on the POGIL website. And under that resources tab, you'll find implementation materials. And within the implementation guide, under that part of the website, there's a list of many, many different roles that our facilitators use. People use manager or facilitator, they use recorder, they use spokesperson, they use a quality control, they use a process analyst, they use materials person. It really depends on what's the activity, on your students and what they're able to do. Some people use a reader, particularly with lower level students. That's helpful, or ESL students. So it really depends on your class and the goals that you have for a particular activity, what's going to fit well. I know a lot of people also use the roles not just with a POGIL activity, but then also carrying over to like a lab that they might be doing. So the person maybe who's the manager or the facilitator for the POGIL group then also is responsible for collecting, certain materials or returning certain materials for labs. And some teachers find that having those roles used not just within the POGIL group, but in other kinds of group situations helps reinforce that and helps kids kind of really build on that skill. Carrie, do you have anything to add there?
What I There's lots of different ways of having POGIL roles. I actually made little tents, just fold a piece of paper in half and I put it with bright colors. I'm an artist, so it always has to be color in my classroom. And I laminate them. And I think it was Ashley who asked, I have a manager. The manager looks over everybody's jobs and makes sure it's people that are functioning. And sometimes I'll ask them to analyze themselves on their roles also. And the manager just kind of watches and moves things along and keeps the pace. If many times I didn't even discuss this. Let's say I want them to get into a stop sign in 15 minutes. I'll put a timer up, one off of the internet, a free download, the timer, and they know they have 15 minutes. Let's say they have 20 questions, and after 10 minutes, they've only gotten to 5 of them. The manager has to move them along. Or come over and talk, call me over and have the spokesperson talk to me. So the manager's watching everybody. The recorder is self-evident. The recorder's writing down everything in case somebody misses something. They can go back. If someone's out, they can go back and go through it. The reader is actually reading in a quiet manner. And then I have a spokesperson/technician. So the spokesperson is the only person allowed to talk to me. They also go and collect anything the students might need in the way of supplies. And I have a spokesperson, and I think it's a really great job to have because they're the only ones that could talk to me. So if the manager has a question, they have to explain and identify what they do or don't understand to the spokesperson. Then the spokesperson has to internalize what the manager is saying, figure out what the question is, parrot it back to them to make sure they understand, and then ask me. So by doing that, a kid's not going to come up to you and say, I didn't get it. I don't get this. Well, what don't you get? Those are like real buttons for me. I say you must identify what don't you know. Can you do this? Yes. Can you do that? Yes. Can you do this thing? No. Now we know what you don't understand. Yeah. So what you didn't understand was how to apply lone pairs to polarity of molecules. And to me, that is really important because I don't get it means that the student hasn't thought about it enough to identify what their problems are. And when you're working, when there's a problem, you got to solve it or else you're going to be given a pink slip. And in this day and age, no job is a given anymore. So I really like having a spokesperson as the only person that can talk to me. And it leads to less chaos. There's the other group members actually listen while the spokesperson is talking to make sure they're saying the right thing. And I kind of like that. And I think it's great when people are using it for other things than POGIL because they kind of are used to the jobs and they know one time they'll be a reader, one time they'll be a recorder because the boys will invariably give the recorder to the girls. So
I know also with the spokesperson, people like that because it cuts down on the questions coming to the teacher. Because by the time people have had to do all that parroting and talking back that Carrie has said within their group, oftentimes the kids answer the questions themselves. And so it cuts down on that stuff that filters back to the teacher. On that implementation guide on our website, there are files with the roll cards that Carrie's mentioning, or there's also a table tents one. We have some teachers that use badges that they laminate and have kids actually clip like a name badge onto their clothes for the day. So there are a lot of different vehicles that teachers use to identify roles and to help kids know what roles they're portraying. And all of that's in that implementation guide files for you to download to look at. Other questions for roles or anything else? We're also going to be having another separate webinar all about roles and student roles in groups. So that would be something you'll want to make sure if that's of interest to you that you sign up and listen in on. Okay, so resources on the POGIL website. All the links to the publishers of the materials that we have available are there under that resources tab. Again, these implementation materials that we're talking about. There are some videos. There are some really great short video clips on interpersonal effectiveness skills that are students working together in groups to help show what it looks like when you're a good manager, what it looks like when you're being the spokesperson, and then also what kinds of things not to do within a group when you're trying to be a good cooperative group member. So those are all tools and things that are available to help you implement POGIL in your class. Spend some time poking around at that. There's also a section of selected references and other links that you might find helpful on that resources tab. these are the rest of the webinars that are coming up in our series. Next month, Christine, who has been monitoring our chat, is going to be leading us through a POGIL activity up close and personal to really help you understand the learning cycle in the activities, help you understand the scaffolding of questions, and giving you some tips on using POGIL activities. So the stop signs, the key points, all the things that we've included to make them a good tool for you in your class. In May, we're going to be talking about group dynamics, and that's where we're going to focus more. Christine says, please come back next month. Yeah. And I should also tell you, Christine is getting married the weekend right after this event that she's leading this webinar. So she is a real trooper to give of her time in a week that's so important on a personal level to run a webinar for us. So I really appreciate that. So the May webinar is going to be about group dynamics, and we are going to dive a lot more into student roles then. So again, if that's of interest to you, that would be a good webinar to listen in on. And our last one in the series is going to be on reporting out and making connections, where we're going to talk about different ways of reporting out. You start to get into that a little bit with some of your chat tonight with the whiteboards and some other things that were mentioned, but there are many, many different ways for you to do quick formative assessments within your classrooms. So we're going to give you some ideas about that. And I want to say thanks again to everyone for participating. We're really excited that you were here and hope you found it a valuable hour of your time. If you have more questions, feel free to email me at cindy.w@pogil.org. And again, if you're interested, sign up for an event. Go to that events tab on our website and look for what might be coming close to you. I will be sending out a survey with links to the recording and also asking you for some feedback about our event so we can continue to work and improve, and also find out what other topics you might be interested in having an evening like this available for you. So we'd appreciate your feedback through that response to that survey as well. Again, thank you for attending. Good night.